think you're definitely on the right track. That LTV as just an aggregate number isn't that helpful. It's still massively better than not having anything. But where LTV really comes into its own is when we can look at it from the various segments or cohorts. Now look at it as a time-based cohort like you have in Google Analytics.
Yes, we found those cohorts. We have in Google Analytics and Mixed Panel.
Great, and it's kind of the first step, but if you think about it, like what's happening behind the time cohort? So the idea is here that we've done something differently, and then therefore from a certain time point onwards, our customers are behaving differently. But if we just look at it overall, this is kind of obscured. So the next step, what we want to do is we want to look at the LTV on a per segment basis. So for instance, in our previous example, when we have this change in time, what happened was that first of all, we have, let's say that one segment was dominating, and then after treatment, a second segment that's more profitable became much stronger, and now we have two equally big segments, and therefore we should probably then start to look at the LTV on each segment individually, and that would also show us what better ways we can then kind of improve and nail just the high LTV segments rather than just working on the entire population. A segment can also be something like the users that went through a specific path in our applications, or the users that used some feature. For instance, we can maybe compare users that used our refer feature against all other users, and we can see kind of some differences here. So basically, a segment is anything that we want to split our users into one or into several different groups.
Wow, that's very interesting. How do we get this data? How do we get hands-on knowledge of this?
I guess it's kind of a bottom-up and top-down process. You can kind of approach it from both sides. Personally, I like kind of do actually kind of both and intermix them. So when going top-down, you basically start with your domain knowledge. So you already can have some hypothesis of what's going on in your application, or maybe here a gold mine of information are going to be interviews with users or surveys where you can see things like, for instance, which trigger words work for users, or what are their main concerns, what are their main reasons for buying. These are all excellent candidates of very kind of a top level like segmentation. We say, okay, for instance, we have one group of users who are fundamentally price conscious, and they've chosen our product just because it's the cheapest way to get what they need. And then we have another segment of users who are predominantly motivated by wanting to have as little hassle as possible, and they're choosing us for convenience. And if you think about it, like probably these two, maybe they're kind of right now, they are both choosing our product, but going forward, we'll have to make some sacrifices, some compromises to better serve one or the other. And this is something that can more or less only come from user data. And on the other extreme, going bottom up from data, that's a kind of more or less kind of a data sciencey approach, where we just do something like clustering or something like that on our data, and just look at the patterns in data and how some users are kind of more similar to others based on things such as any data that we might have on them, and also if you look at behavioral data, meaning how they're using our application or how they're interacting in their web page, for instance. Things like, it usually turns out that some people will just come to our web page and buy almost immediately, while then you have another group of people who can tend to return maybe 6 times and look at over and over again before making a decision. That's kind of something, for instance, a feature that would then go into our model, which would then pick those users apart. Ideally, what you want is that, at least for your main segmentation, that the ideas you have coming from the bottom up, I mean, from the domain side, and the segmentation coming from the data side, they would coincide, although that's kind of, usually that doesn't happen, at least not initially, so they don't get disparate if this doesn't happen, because if anything, segmentation is a very iterative process. If you start something, you might figure out that it doesn't make sense, or even one thing also that I need to emphasize is you might have a beautiful separation in terms of data and have a very clear defined segments, but then you look at those segments from various business metrics like LTV, and you see that there is no difference in them. And that means that, yes, it's mathematically beautiful, but it's also completely useless for what you're trying to do. So it will usually take a couple of attempts, and it's kind of the same as with most growth hacking, where it's kind of have to set up hypothesis, where here the hypothesis is going to be that this particular feature or this particular behavior is something that splits our users, and then see that if that holds, and then continue to kind of refine our models.